every film you get to work on, it's its own little, kind of combat team, right? It's like we're all in this together. Sometimes you form fast friendships really quickly
Yeah.
because you're all marching toward the same goal. You're all there to make this thing the best it can be.
Welcome to episode number 5 of the Comedy and Film Artist Podcast. I'm Benjamin Vomastic and joined today by Dale Dobson, who plays Dave in the upcoming production Hometown Summer, and he's also been in 100 other movies. How are you doing today, Dale?
I'm doing very well, Benjamin. How are you?
Doing great, thanks.
Cool.
Yeah, so just jumping right in. I mean, I have a ton of
Sure.
questions with
Let,
your
let's
wealth of
just let's just go
experience.
for it, and we can. I know we both love to talk comedy, so
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you've done a ton of comedic acting. Yeah. So just starting off, what got you into acting? Like, when did you start? What was it that got you in? Who, what, when, where, why, how?
yeah, I think I've
Yeah.
always had a love of storytelling. Like
Hmm.
I can trace, loving suspense back to, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Pot when he got stuck
Hmm.
in the tree when my grandma read that story to me as a kid. And but I didn't act right away. As a kid I was shy, so I did puppeteering, I did
Hmm.
magic tricks, I did some things that were performance, but where I could still hide behind things a little bit.
Yeah.
And then in junior high, I had some friends who appreciated my sense of humor and started encouraging me to perform per se.
Hmm.
Um, it really wasn't until college that I think I started to take it seriously when
Hmm.
I had some theater professors and directors who were like, "Yeah, you should be thinking, this is something that you clearly enjoy doing and can afford to take seriously."
Yeah.
But even then in college, I was playing older characters, guys in their 40s, 50s,
Hmm.
70s sometimes. So it wasn't until I kind of got to the right age that I said, "Okay, now I can start to play the kinds of characters I apparently am good at
Hmm.
playing credibly on camera." And to a lesser degree, theater, you have a little more leeway there, but still. But yeah, I think that's it. I love storytelling. I love being part of the process. Um, I always say I feel like this is like the technology has changed, but what we do
Hmm.
is not that different from our ancestors sitting around the campfire at
Hmm.
the end of the day, telling a story about the day's hunt and gather, and some story from generations past about something funny that happened
Hmm.
that probably no longer bears any resemblance to what actually happened, but it's
Yeah.
it's part of how we communicate. We share morals and ideas and just entertainment with each other through stories.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. When was your first on camera role?
Well, my first one was back in the early 2000s, a film called Resurrection Mary. Not the one that, if you've seen a Resurrection Mary, it probably was a different one. There were several of them based on the urban legend around that time. And it's funny because it was shot on it was pre-digital, so it was shot on like a high 8 camcorder.
Mhm.
And the lighting is so poor that if it weren't for my voice, I wouldn't be able to confirm that I was in fact
Oh
in it, in my,
wow.
my little scene. Yeah, it's like you can see like bits and pieces, and I was playing a college student in it. It was fun. I learned some things, but it was a while then before I did my first real movie, which was the science fiction comedy Fuab from Uranus and Back, directed by Stephen Foker and written by him, that we shot out in Iowa back in 2018, and it just came out in 2023 because it took a while to get the visual effects done on a budget. So,
Yeah.
but
Wow. Okay. So you're saying, wait, if I heard that correctly, you're saying like your first like real movie was 2018.
we shot it in 2018. Yep, and
Yeah,
I
and
think
it was just released last
yeah,
year.
it was just released a few years ago. I shot another one not too long after that called Blame that
Uh-huh.
I think released in 21 or 22. A thriller that was fun, and I had a good time working on that. You've always got stuff in the pipeline, so there are
Yeah.
always the things that you've shot, and
Right.
sometimes you've gotten to see them, and you're like, okay, this is one of the good ones. You're waiting
Yeah.
for it to come out, hit
Yeah.
distribution, and that can take an indeterminate amount of
Oh
time
yeah.
on the
Eh,
indie scene, as you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So over the past 7 years, that's when you've gotten the 100 different project?
Yeah. I've been racking up. I mean, the
Oh.
one dates back into 2001. Well, and keep in mind, right? Your IMDb credit list. It's like there's stuff on it that got entered into IMDb but never quite got finished and released. There's
uh,
also stuff you've done that, for whatever reason, just doesn't end up in IMDb, right?
yeah.
There's stuff I'm in that has not had an IMDb entry created yet. That I know the film's complete. I've seen the
Mhm.
film maybe. So it's a there's always some errors in a database that large, but I do kind of use it as a milestone to say, okay, I've done enough stuff that's out there that that I'm proud of, that I can be happy with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I mean that's more movies than like any like than literally anyone I've ever heard of. So,
Well, I mean, keep in mind, right? It's in my demographic, right? What I play are a lot of what we call day player roles.
mhm,
I'm there for a day to play a character who's hopefully got a funny little moment or a
mhm.
couple of scenes. Hopefully, I'm contributing to the story in some meaningful way and having some fun doing it. But yeah, that means I had a 20-day stretch recently where I think I shot 9 projects in 4 states, and I was
Yeah,
just playing, a bunch of mostly day player or 1 or 2 day type characters.
yeah,
But if I can make an impression with a character, or sometimes they'll bring me back. I'm going out west to work on to do some more work on a film I worked on a while back,
mhm.
to because they decided to add another scene involving the characters. So I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to
Yeah,
continue that story and revisit that work and kind of get back into that mindset. So.
yeah. Oh, wow. No, that's so cool. So, a couple of questions came to mind based on what you just said. So, one, did you take like a pretty long hiatus in acting?
Well, I was doing what I was doing for a long time was I was just doing community theater.
Okay.
I didn't feel like I was quite ready, or hadn't really thought about it seriously, I guess.
Uh,
2 things kind of happened, and this was probably about 9 years ago now. An audition came up for a play by one of my favorite playwrights, Christopher Durang, and I was like, if I don't audition for this, I'm going to go see it and wish I had
mhm,
auditioned. I was
mhm.
like, if I audition and I don't get cast, no problem. Now I can go see it and enjoy it and knew I at least gave it a shot.
Yeah.
But I got cast in that. It was my first. Well, I had done a professional production back in 2001, but I hadn't done much other than some like murder mystery dinner things.
Mhm.
So I did that. I mean, I was cast in that, and then they asked me to come and do the show they were doing before that because they needed a replacement actor. And then I just kind of got into the groove of it. I did my first film, which was a student film, but a student feature down in Ohio a
Mhm.
few months later. So that was when I started to kind of go, okay, I'm ready to do this. The other factor was that I'd been doing community theater, but I'd gotten to the point where I'm like, I think I'm getting cast in some of these things not because I'm right for the character, but because they know I will show up and know my lines. And that's fine, but it meant it was time for me to grow. One of the
Mhm.
things that I always like to do is work with actors who are more experienced, more
Mhm.
knowledgeable, better known than myself. I can learn from them, and
Mhm.
I try to keep that in mind, when I'm working with newer actors, younger actors, to be open about sharing with them, because that's how we all get better and that's how we
Yeah.
raise the bar. So sometimes you hit the first day on set and you've got some really great people, and suddenly it's like everyone else is like, we got to up our game, we got to match this. It's
Yeah.
great when everything is just cooking and you feel like, yeah, we are all doing the very best work
Oh,
we
yeah.
can. And I'm sure you see that as a director as well.
Yeah, 100%. No, I love that so much. And I mean, it
Yeah.
goes to the phrase that's used in sports a lot, but I think it relates to film as well. Just iron
Mhm.
sharpens iron.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. There's nothing better than being like, oh, okay, yeah, this is on. We're gonna kick. We're going to make this work as best we can, and when you've got a director who is encouraging that interplay and that and can direct it, right? Can
Yeah.
say, hey, this is great, but let that kick in a couple lines later. When you can be
Yeah.
precise with directing,
Mhm.
and you've got actors who are collaborative and listening, that's where the magic
Oh,
happens.
yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, before it escapes my mind, the other thing I wanted to bring up was that you do a lot of traveling for roles.
I do. I
Yeah.
mean, you kind of, as an actor, you kind of have to go where the work is.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
know
I mean,
Michigan's not the best.
well, I mean, there's a lot going on here, really. There is. It's just I want to work with people I haven't worked with before. I want to
Okay.
dip my toes into places that are new to me.
Hmm.
Um, and, often once I've gotten to know some people in an area, I'll see them again, or I'll see
Hmm.
them, you go to Chicago and you see people from all over the
Hmm.
Midwest on,
Yeah.
on set.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy traveling for work. I don't do a lot of vacationing per se.
Hmm.
So having to go, like my California trip next month, I know they only need me one day, but they weren't sure which day for a while, so I'm going to be there for 2 days. I'm going to have one day to just kind of.
Yeah.
I wish I was closer to LA so I could see some friends, but I'm a little
Yeah.
north of there. But it'll still be like, okay, I've got a little downtime. I've got a little
Yeah.
time to enjoy the visit, enjoy the time away. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, so you get to when you go, like I know you do a lot in the Midwest, but it seems like you also do quite a bit just across the other regions as well.
Yeah, I'll go where, if I'm cast and I need to go there. And when it's someplace like Atlanta or LA where it's a bigger market,
Hmm.
Chicago too, where I feel like some work I do here, enables me to meet some people that, I would like to work with again or that,
Hmm.
I might run across again or who might, remember me when they see an audition for another project they're
Yeah.
doing and say, oh, I worked with that guy. Hopefully he was good to work with and we'd love to have
Yeah,
him.
that's always the
You know.
hope. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, so you get to see inevitably like you get to see a lot of the country as well and meet a lot of different people, a lot of different
Yeah.
cultures, I'm assuming, which
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
amazing.
for sure. I mean, every
Yeah.
every film you get to work on, it's its own little, kind of combat team, right? It's like we're all in this together. Sometimes you form fast friendships really quickly
Yeah.
because you're all marching toward the same goal. You're all there to make this thing the best it can be. And when the lighting person is on point and the cinematographer is
Yeah.
is is doing their great work and the director knows what they need and is decisive and efficient, everything is, we're all there to do the work.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, no, the collaboration aspect and just like the overall like just teamwork you get together and the relationships you build on film sets is
yeah,
just
you
so
can't do
beautiful.
this work by yourself.
Oh
it
no,
takes it
hell
takes a
no.
group of
Yeah.
people. And
Yeah.
when everyone is there and and when everyone's operating professionally and knows what they're doing
Hmm.
or is willing to learn if they don't,
Yeah.
you're going to get better results than so that's one thing I love about indie cinema. I think that level of passion for the story pays off in ways that bigger budgets don't always benefit from.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was a conversation I had with Christian, the gaffer from Hometown
Hmm.
Summer, and our on the first podcast we did. That was something we really got into, and something we both agree with as well. I mean, there's just something so beautiful about independent cinema.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible these days with digital technology
Hmm.
to make a credible looking feature film for not a whole lot of money. I mean, not
Right.
compared to what
Yeah.
it was, in the celluloid days. You've just
Yeah.
got more options to save both on film costs, but also just on time, right? You can look at what you just shot,
Yeah.
say, I think we got it, let's
Yeah.
check it,
Hmm.
as opposed to looking at the dailies the next morning and saying, we got to boom in the shot. We got to bring back those actors and book that location again and get the kids and the elephant back. There's just so
Yeah.
much stuff that you can shortcut and know that you're getting what you need as you go. And that's a
Yeah.
huge time and cost saver as a
Yeah.
result.
Definitely. Yeah. Is there a favorite place that you've traveled to, or like a regular one that you've traveled to for acting, where you
Um,
see like you see on backstage like there's a role here, like ooh I love going there, like that'll be fun.
yeah,
Let's
I
audition for
mean,
this.
I tend to like variety. I mean, I always like going to Chicago, even though I
Yeah.
hate trying to park there. It's always a little
Yeah.
messy.
Uh,
But I've done enough stuff there. I'm usually there 2 or 3 times a year, so I'm
uh-huh.
starting to learn my way around to where it's a little more. I can wrap up, if it's late and I'm heading home that night, I can be like, okay, I know how to get from here to the way out of town, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, I mean, I've done a lot with my friend Stephen in Iowa.
Hmm.
I've done
We're about
three
in Iowa, by the
features.
way.
He's in Davenport, which I love
He's
going to
where?
I love going to Davenport because when my brother and I were kids, there was a company called Black Hawk Films based in Davenport.
Uh-huh.
They used to distribute a lot of the old Buster Keaton comedies, vintage animation on, 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter
Yeah.
prints, home movie prints, and on VHS tape. So Davenport was always sort of like the Emerald City to my brother and I when we were
Yeah.
young. So actually spending time there and doing film work there, it always feels like, oh yeah, this is like in a weird way connecting with my own, interest
Yeah.
in the medium. But I like going anywhere. I like to
Yeah.
be, sometimes it's nice when you go someplace you've been before, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I go to this studio and shoot stuff all the time. It's
Yeah.
familiar. I know my way around. But GPS is a marvel, and a good
Yeah.
call sheet will say, "Here's where you're supposed to park," and
Yes.
we'll have
Yeah.
a shuttle running if it's too far from set. All of
Mhm.
that stuff, that's part of the process, and I kind of enjoy that too. I don't think I could do this without being in the smartphone era. I don't think I could go everywhere
Yeah.
and do as much as I do. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Have you done anything in Indianapolis by chance?
Yeah,
Yeah.
only one thing. I did a student film there
Oh wow.
years
Okay.
ago now, in 2019 probably. But the young man who directed that ended up going to work for Full Moon Features. So he's like been a PA and gaffer on some of their films. And I love the Charles Band aesthetic. We have had, we ended up with some common connections because some people who've worked on those films worked on a
Yeah.
film that I exec produced down in Florida. So it's a small world sometimes. But yeah, that was a fun little film. It was something relatively early that I did, and I
Hmm.
was like, oh, it's a little sci-fi short. It's got some effects in it, and yeah, it was fun to do. And yeah. So that's the only thing I've really done. I work with an agency in Indianapolis,
Uh-huh.
and this year I've done films in Angola, Indiana, and Michigan City, Indiana, and a
Uh-huh.
commercial in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But that's as close as I've actually gotten to Indianapolis this year.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Do you have connections or roots in that area? Or
I mean, I love the city, but I know that's actually one of my favorite cities. But I know Michelle did something there recently,
oh, okay,
and I
okay.
just heard that they like that the city's coming up for film.
Yeah, there
That's what I'm
seems to be a
hearing.
lot of stuff going on in Indiana now, more than I remember there being I don't think I did anything between 2017 and or 2019, whenever that was, and this year. I guess that was 2017 as I think about it. But like I had a bunch of years in there where I wasn't really doing anything in Indiana,
Mhm.
and then this year I've been there for three projects. So, it seems like there's stuff going on in the
Mhm.
state anyway. And a lot of that's coming out of Indianapolis, but Fort Wayne's got a scene too. There's
Okay.
definitely some directors and production people I know that are based around the Fort Wayne area.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. No, that's good to know. Hopefully,
Yeah, the
Michigan
Midwest.
starts to.
Yeah, well, I think if we get the film incentive
Oh, that'll be.
pack,
Yeah.
that will probably make a big difference. I was not
Yeah.
doing this when the original round of film incentives were in place. So,
Me either. Yeah.
and I've been holding off joining the union. I'm eligible, but there's so much non-union work here that I'm reluctant to. But if we get the incentives back, that could change the calculus on that pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
we will see what happens, but I hope it does. But, LA is not so much I mean, it's still the epicenter of studios and
Right.
a lot of production companies, but I've worked with a lot of LA production companies that are here shooting in Michigan
Mhm.
just because we've got the environment they need, or they've got a
Mhm.
staff member who's based here and says, hey, we can do this, this, and this, and we can
Right.
put the crew up with my relatives. And there's stuff that makes Michigan attractive, and it's not like you have to shoot everything in LA anymore. There's so
Right.
much that goes on, in Canada. There's
Mhm.
so much that goes on in other states because
Yeah.
sometimes it's just the right place to shoot.
Yeah.
You're more portable than you used to be.
Yeah.
And we've got a good technical foundation. I mean, having the tax incentives for the time we did really gave us a solid technical foundation. You've got great sound people, great
Hmm.
editors, and some of those jobs can be done remotely,
Hmm.
but the people you need on site, we've got. I did a film a couple weeks ago that was half LA, half Michigan crew,
Okay.
and there, so I knew like people from the Michigan side of things. I didn't know the other folks, but they were obviously working well together
Hmm.
at a
Yeah, no, that's
professional
great.
level.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm wondering, what are some of the biggest ways you've grown as an actor since you started acting, specifically on film?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, I mean, I can see like the very first kind of real scene I did on
Hmm.
film. It worked for the character all right, but I could tell I was nervous,
Hmm.
that first
Fair enough.
day. It
Yeah.
was just like, um, still getting used to the idea that, you learn the lines and you have no sense of what the blocking is. Because coming from theater, it was like, well, you kind of get those down together early in the process. So
Hmm.
it's like, the lines for me sometimes come more easily when I know what the blocking is. At least that was a crutch I used to think I needed. So the first time on film, it was like, okay, it's a page and a half of dialogue,
Hmm.
but I just got to know it, and then we'll find out what the blocking is. And I hadn't met
Yeah.
the other actor I was working with, so it was like we got to find the chemistry of it. But
Yeah.
it was all fine. I think that's probably the biggest thing is I've just become more confident in knowing what I'm doing and knowing what the work demands. Also, just understanding technical things. When someone says move to the right, I know to say my right or camera right because and
Yeah.
that's helpful, especially when I'm working with like film students, which I still do quite a bit. I really enjoy being in that mix. It sometimes lets me help, nudge a little bit when I'm like, I think I might have a solution I can suggest
Hmm.
to the
Yeah.
director. I mean, so, I know I'm much more confident now when I go in for an audition.
Hmm.
I'm much more, you know, aware that sometimes you're just the wrong height, you got the wrong eye color, like there
Yeah.
are lots of things that you just can't control. And that's one thing I often tell young actors is don't worry about any specific project or audition. Don't get your heart set on it because all that's going to do is put you on pins and needles and probably get disappoint you. It's like do your best in the audition, show them what your take on the character is, and then move on, to the next audition. I was at a festival yesterday,
Hmm.
and the director of one of the films that was showing there that I was in, he said, Dale's audition was just, kind of chill. He was like everyone else was being like, very like hard edged about it, and Dale's take was different, and
Hmm.
that's what appealed to him, and that's why I got the part. So you can't try to imagine here's what they're looking for, let me try to be that.
Yeah.
It's much better to say this is who I am, I'm going to play it this way and we'll see if it works.
Yeah.
I mean the first time I auditioned for you it wasn't a good fit, right? But you found another role for me to
Yeah.
do on that project, and that, so having that confidence that like okay, I feel like I know what I'm doing, I know I'm not right for everything, but that's cool. That's, if I do, half a dozen auditions a week and I, don't book any of them, yeah, it's a little, disappointing maybe, but that's normal. That's how this business works. Um,
Yeah,
eh,
yeah. I resonated with a lot of what you said, and I think that it's really tough for me because like I do my own casting for my
mhm.
films, and there's just so many talented actors, and it's like, oh, like this person is so talented, like I can see it, but it's not necessarily the right fit,
Right.
and
Right,
it's
exactly.
unfortunate. Like,
It
like,
it's a, it can be a tough call. I got that question once from a student director at in a class that I was kind of guesting on to just give these new directors an actor's perspective, and that was a question I got was
mhm,
from a student who was trying to cast their project, and he was like, I've got these two actors for this one role, and they'd both be great for it, and I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And I just said, look, we're actors, we understand, or we learn very early that
yeah,
it's not it's not anything personal. It's what's best for the project. And,
Yeah.
and if you don't get cast, you just don't get cast, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you can't come back and audition for something else that director does. They don't have anything against you.
Oh no, yeah.
It's you and the character and their vision of the character. Sometimes you come in with something unexpected and they're like, "Oh, wait, that's interesting. Let's give it to this actor." And other times they're like, "Yeah, I can see there's a spark there, but this is not the right fit." And
Yeah.
and directors have to make those difficult decisions, which is one reason people employ casting directors. Is sometimes you need someone who can be a little more, "Hey, I've narrowed it down to these three candidates. Help
Yeah.
me, decide. Let's decide which of these is the right ones. That you're not the one looking at 50 auditions, because most people auditioning, especially at a certain level, are good. They know
Hmm.
they know what they're doing. They're going to give you
Yeah.
something watchable.
Hmm.
There are
Yeah,
always the
definitely.
ones I'm sure that you can like just dismiss out of hand, but there probably aren't that many,
No.
especially when you're casting for paying work at a
Yeah.
certain budget level. But that's so anyway. That's one of the things that I try to share with new actors and new
Yeah.
directors is just you got to make a decision, and you should base it on what's right for the story, not what's best for you know your peace of mind or professionals know you don't get everything you audition for. You're
Yeah.
grateful for the stuff that you do. And that's probably one thing I've learned over the years that has given me more confidence is I've come to really appreciate when somebody casts me, it means I'm not the only person who thinks I can play this role.
Hmm.
And that does a lot to boost confidence
Yeah.
to say, all right, let's get in there and make this movie. It
Yeah.
lets you walk into set going, yep, it kind of gets rid of the imposter syndrome that you might feel like, everyone feels that professionally at some point where it's like, oh my God, all these people waiting on me to come in and do this bit. But it's like, yeah, well, that's how the process works. The more you do it, the more you just understand rationally how it works, and the more you can say, look, we're all here to tell the best story we can. Having confidence in the process, that's probably the biggest thing. I didn't know anything much about the process when I started working on camera.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those are all like very interesting insights for sure, and it's cool to hear on this side because like I guess I've never like talked to actors before about like what it's like to like not be cast, especially like if you get like a callback or multiple callbacks. Like
Yeah, sometimes you
it's
get
tough.
close. Yeah, I mean,
It's
but it's like there are times when like I know different actors have different opinions. Like, do you want to know that you got close, right?
yeah.
That you were like in the running, and then they went a different direction. And I go back and forth on it. It's like usually I kind of like to know that because it means okay, there was something I did in the audition that was working.
Yeah.
And the other thing that actors always, think about is when you're auditioning for one project, you're kind of auditioning for that director's next project as well.
Hmm.
Because sometimes the director will say, yeah, I don't see a fit here. But then when they're, looking at casting a future project, they see you show up again and they're like, oh, I kind of like this person. Let
Yeah.
me see what they're doing with this. Or sometimes you go in, especially in live auditions, and you come in to read one thing and they're like, hang on, can you read this also? And you get that page and you read it and you're like, oh, well, this is a much better fit. And you
Yeah.
hope they agree.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, there's been multiple cases of someone who I didn't cast in one project, but then did on the next, or didn't
Hmm.
cast for a specific role in the one project, but cast in another role.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, no, I think that like, I mean, just on my end, like, I would just say that like, I sincerely hope. I mean, inevitably people will, especially like if there are some people early on, like you said, like it's you learn. But like I hope as few people as possible take it personally because like I can like say like on my end like it is agonizing, especially
Yeah.
like the final round of casting. Like the
Yeah.
idea of like telling someone like thank you so much for like all of the work you've put in towards auditioning. Like I'm
Hmm.
sorry we went with someone else. Like those are like painful emails to send.
Yeah, they are, but it's just part of the process. You
Yeah.
can't cast two people in the same role,
That's the thing,
and
yeah.
and you have to do what's best for your story. And sometimes, I mean, I auditioned for a project this summer that it ended up they just kind of weren't able to afford me, which was sort of flattering in a way, but it was also like, I maybe could have come up with it, but the way their shooting schedule and the distance would have been a problem anyway. So
Yeah.
it was fine. It didn't work out. But that's the nature of this business as well, is that, sometimes I get offered something and it's like, I'm already booked that week. And it's like, I would have
Yeah.
loved to do that, maybe more than the thing I am doing, but, I've committed to this and I'm not going to break that commitment. That's I think a key thing. That's one of the things that I tell younger, newer actors is,
Mhm.
basic professionalism is so
Oh yeah.
important. If you commit, you know, be there before call time. It's better to aim to be half an hour early than to end up 5 minutes late. It's like if you're early, you can, go over your lines one more time.
Yeah.
You can get settled in. You can be ready to go. Sometimes you get to set, and usually there's a wait before they need you. But sometimes you get to set, and they're like, "Hey, we had to rearrange something else. Get into hair and makeup. We're going to do this shortly."
Mhm.
So it's and that's one thing that's hard to tell when you're casting, right? Is you're seeing these self tapes,
Mhm.
and sometimes you don't know, is this person, gonna be there? They're
Mhm.
clearly talented, but
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are talented. It's like the few name actors that I've worked with. I've always been impressed that they are, they're punctual and they're
Mhm.
collaborative and they're prepared.
Mhm.
That doesn't go away. If you're a working actor, that basic level of being ready and being ready to work and to collaborate and to listen
Mhm.
is absolutely critical. And sometimes you meet new actors who they know what it is to be a star, but they don't know what it is to be a working actor,
Mhm.
and it shows. And they don't get cast again because they're just not someone you can work with or rely on, and that's
Oh
not a good
yeah.
position to be in.
No, yeah,
So,
no. I mean
but
that's so important. I mean, yeah, no, like you definitely like yeah, you hit the nail on the head with like the professionalism so important. I mean, I appreciate that so much. I mean, thankfully on this set, like everyone, cast and crew, everyone was super
yeah, you
professional.
had
Everyone
really
was
it was a really
punctual.
healthy environment, good chemistry, good working, approach. It's always good when you say quiet on set and everyone actually becomes quiet on set.
Oh no, I can't. I've never had that problem. You've been on a set before where that's an
Well,
issue.
sometimes you have background actors who don't realize how sensitive the mics are,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and they have to be reminded that, hey, we can hear everything going on back
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
It's really weird, like for like people who are new to the medium or new to the
Yeah.
process don't always understand how precise and how delicate everything can be, and how important it is just to listen
Yeah.
and pay attention to, every instruction you're given, every direction, and when you're acting, your fellow actors, and even if you're just in the background miming dialogue, you want to have eye contact and you want to,
Hmm.
imagine what you're saying to each other, even when you're just moving your mouths and gesturing, because it'll look like there's an actual conversation happening. If
Yeah.
you're if you're
Yeah.
if you're in an office scene, look at your calendar, make some notes, actually type some miscellaneous stuff on the
Yeah.
keyboard, because it'll look more real than if you're just like, I'm in an office.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, you've given a lot of really great advice to for like what you would give to like beginning actors
hmm
or early on. Curious, like any advice you might give to like an actor who's maybe a little more experienced, but like feels like they're kind of stagnant, like they're not like making advances, like things aren't going how they would like from their acting career perspective. Like, is there any advice that you could offer up to someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is not necessarily different for actors starting out either, but sometimes you
Hmm.
have to be willing to say, look, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for anything where it looks like there might be a fit.
Hmm.
Audition for everything you can. If you're free and someone's got a little fun project, interesting role for you that maybe isn't even paying anything, if it's a friend or a student project, if you can do it, go do it
Hmm.
because you learn something from every project you do.
Hmm.
And, sometimes as a creative person in any, field, you have to be willing to reinvent yourself to say, oh, here's now what I am. Like I'm at an age where it's like I demographically qualify for like the grandfather roles, but until my hair goes gray, I don't think I'm going to get a lot of those. So I throw my
Yeah.
hat in the ring for them, but I don't really expect anything. Like when I do play those roles, often I'm having my hair artificially grayed by the hair and makeup artist
Yeah.
because it's like, okay, I know I can, find the body language and the voice and such, but cosmetically, it's like you got to just make some adjustments. I think any time you feel, it was kind of what I went through that I mentioned earlier. Like I had sort of reached a plateau doing the theater work
Hmm.
I was
Yeah.
doing, and I was like, I need to start working professionally because I know that's going to challenge me.
Hmm.
And the first professional rehearsal I had, it was for a musical, and it was a 5 6 hour dance rehearsal. And at the end of the day, I was like, I got to up my game, but this is good. This is the
Yeah.
challenge that I need. This is how I'm going to step forward in terms of what I'm doing. I think always challenging yourself,
Yes.
even if it's just something you do privately, tackle a serious monologue or a
Hmm.
comedic
Hmm.
monologue that stretches your skill set. Do student films because you get to play interesting characters. They're usually only a day or two to
Hmm.
shoot, and you can at least build up your demo reel doing some
Yeah.
of that work. It's like always do the thing you don't think you can do. Last summer was the first like feature lead I had that was a dramatic role.
Hmm.
I know
Okay.
I've done good supporting characters, usually comedies, but sometimes horror or
Yeah.
drama. But that was the first time where I played a character who was like kind of close to myself, and that taught me a lot of things that it pushed my abilities and it expanded my toolbox. I had a scene where I was writing a suicide note to my
Oh
son,
shit.
and
Okay.
I was like, okay, this is going to be an interesting scene to do. But as I was writing it, there were droplets appearing on the page, and it took me a second to go, oh, those are coming from me. I am weeping silently to myself while I am writing this note. And that was so nice for me because it was like, oh, this is something I haven't done before. This is
That's
something that is
powerful.
pushing me into a zone that, if I hadn't just had to do it, I might have been apprehensive about doing. Like it wasn't required in the scene. The director wasn't there going, okay, now you gotta cry here. But just the emotion of the scene gave my instrument and my the character time to really take over and really feel that and let that happen. So anytime you have an opportunity to do something you're maybe a little nervous about, that you're maybe a
Yeah.
little unsure about, bite the bullet and do it because you're going to learn something. Even if what you learn is, yeah, that's just not my wheelhouse, just still do it and do the best work you can because even if you don't quite crack that nut this time, it's going to prepare you to crack it on the next thing. um, so yeah, that's my biggest advice. I mean, that's what I think I've been fortunate to be able to do is to venture into new territory on a fairly regular basis. I love this work because you kind of get to live so many other lives. It's
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I always say it's the most complete vacation you can get because you're putting yourself in this other character. You don't have brain cycles to think about, oh, this bill is due or I got to call my mom. It's like all those things disappear because those are you in your regular life. They are
Yeah.
not the character. The character, when things are going well, takes over in a very real way. And so while you're performing, while you're inhabiting that personality, your own is free to float. And sometimes you come back and it's like, those issues don't seem as big anymore based on what I just went through in this in
Yeah.
this in
Yeah.
this scene.
That's no, that's crazy. Just
Yeah.
to like really think about all that and like how like it can be like therapeutic in a way.
Yeah, oh, it can. It's
Yeah.
cathartic for sure. I play a lot of angry characters, like over the top, comedically angry
Yeah.
sometimes, and I'm pretty happy-go-lucky in real life because I get to kind of work through a lot of that, you
Yeah.
know. But just to get back to what I was saying, I
Yeah.
just saw today the cut of a short film I did in January that
Uh-huh.
was more dramatic. I mean, the character has some goofiness to him, some comedy to him, but it
Mhm.
was more or less a drama, father-daughter piece.
Mhm.
And watching it, I'm going. I haven't seen footage from the other drama I worked on, but just watching this, I can see where that did expand my envelope a little bit, where
Yeah.
there's room for some emotion to come through that maybe a year earlier wouldn't have been there. And I don't know that for sure, but I do know that that's when I feel like I'm growing as an artist, and that I'm learning to do more, and to refine to refine the stuff I know how to do easily, comfortably I should say, and to learn how to explore the discomfort and the nervousness and the new stuff. So
Yeah. No, I mean, someone who I look up to in another space. I remember he made a YouTube video called "Why Discomfort is the Best Feeling." I mean, it has nothing to do with acting, but it was just kind of just a video about just growing in life, and it's just so powerful. I think that that's just like a great philosophy to make yourself
yes, yes. Push
discomforted, and
through
yeah,
the difficult stuff. When you avoid it, it doesn't help. And as an artist, you have a way to do that, maybe in a way that's a little more safe than in your like personal life, where the consequences are more contained.
yeah,
If I end up with a weak performance, I'm like, okay, that I made some bad choices there, and but that doesn't happen often, but there are times where I'm like, yeah, there's, especially when I look at some of my early work, it's like, yeah, I would have probably played that a little differently now, but that's how you learn. You learn by
yeah,
doing as much work as you can, and when you look at it, especially when some time has passed between when you shot it and when it's
yeah.
completed, you can appreciate what you did well, and you can say, yeah, okay, there's an area that I'm still trying to develop. Um, but if the director's happy with it, then you can let yourself be happy with it too. That's
Yeah.
that's a rule.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah, I'm big personally on failure. Fail and learn to
Yeah.
fail
Oh, for
again.
sure. For
Yeah,
sure. Fail better next time. That's
yeah,
that's you don't grow if you don't take those risks.
hmm
And one of the things I love about the creative work is you get a lot of opportunities to take risks. I love filmmakers who take the big swings and they knock it out of the park, maybe, every other movie or one out of five. They,
hmm
they had like a great film and then they've got some mediocre ones, but then they come back to being great again. I'm always cheering for the people who, if I like one film they've made a lot, I'll always be interested in what else they're doing.
yeah,
And.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was actually something that came into my mind, and then it escaped in the middle of the conversation about audition tapes. I love when actors take risks in audition
Hmm.
tapes. Those are the tapes that stick out. Those
Yeah.
are the ones
Yeah.
when they do something that no one else is going to do and
Yes.
really just give that unique take and that fresh
Right.
perspective on the character.
Right.
Like,
And it's real because they're not, in self-tapes especially, they're
yeah,
not seeing what someone else is doing and
yeah,
trying to like steal, not steal, but try to, ape that, try to go like, oh, there's something useful there, let me try to play it that way. The self-tapes are completely, this actor is seeing it this way and that's
hmm
their take, and when something really works for you, you can be, let's go that way. I got a call yesterday to do a film in January, and the director was like, yeah, we were looking at the tapes, and because I was surprised I'd heard back from him fairly soon,
hmm
and he was like, yeah, we were looking at what was coming in, we said, let's just give it to this guy, and he was like, I'm in the process of confirming that you'll take the role so I can notify other people that that we didn't, that we went in a different direction, etc.
hmm
And sometimes it's just like, sometimes you just get the tape in early so that your take is the one that sticks. I mean, there's lots of different ways that people approach the pile of self tapes they have to go through as a director or casting director.
yeah,
But I try to give it, I try to give it my take, and sometimes I know my take is a little out there and might be way wrong for it, but if it's the only way I can think of to play it in a way that interests me, that's what I'm going to send them. And if it works, terrific. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Maybe I'm better off not doing that role because I can't see a way to play it that isn't in this kind of vein.
Yeah.
That's the trick. Is like, well, I'm me. I like to think I have a fair amount of range, but I can't suddenly be Joan Cusack. It's just not in my
Yeah.
wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, out of the 100 films you've done so far, I'm throwing you on the spot, but if you had to guess a
Yeah.
percentage, what percent would you say were comedy?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I would say, including the short films, it's probably the biggest category in my body
Yeah.
of work. I'd perhaps say it's probably 50 to 60%.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that's.
Horror is another category that I love, but I can't really say that a huge percentage of what I've done
Yeah.
has been horror. Like more, I guess if I were to just look at the features, it would be a little more of a balance between
Yeah.
horror and comedy. But a lot of stuff I've done is just, it's straight drama or it's web series that are maybe horror, maybe drama, maybe comedy. Um, yeah, I would say, comedy is kind of my first love.
Yeah.
I love horror as well, and I will always talk to anyone who will listen about how I think that they're similar in terms of building up an expectation and then subverting it in some way, either to
Mhm.
make you laugh or to shock you. Horror and comedy are not that far apart
Mhm.
in my way of thinking.
Yeah,
But
I've heard that comparison. Yeah.
if I looked at the films I've done this year, one was a yeah, two of the features, the two features, three features that I'm happiest with this year are comedies.
Okay.
I did a biopic, I did a drama that's
Mhm.
like a novel adaptation. Um, and sometimes my role in something is comedic, so I tend to think of the whole project as comedy.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I haven't seen much of it except for the sides. The film I did a few weeks ago, it's like I never saw the whole script. I was just like, this is the scene I need to worry about, so that's what I knew going in.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is my. I knew that the director had seen me in something else and cast me sight unseen because of that performance. So I was
Mhm.
like, okay, he wants something kind of in that same channel. So it
Yeah.
was it was sort of an easy, like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And it was a very short, just a couple lines, so it was easy to do. Or not stressful. It's never easy, but it
Yeah.
wasn't a like, oh man, what am I gonna how am I gonna approach this? That's where you sometimes have questions for the director, is to say, hey, I'm reading this, and is what he's referring to here like a really deep dark secret, or is it just like there's going to be a surprise party tomorrow? Like sometimes you can't tell
Mhm.
on the face of it, and so
Yeah.
you ask those questions.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm forgetting what the word. Yeah, no, I would
The-
say it's been. I would say there's a slight majority to comedy
yeah.
for my performances, just because that's what I do. Now, whether the movie as a whole is comedic, that can vary. Sometimes I'm
Ah.
playing a character that's a bit of comic relief in a story that's otherwise fairly serious. But I would say most of the comedic performances are in proper comedies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I asked because you're one of three actors I think that I've worked with were like who have primarily worked on comedies, or at least half of the projects they've worked on have been comedies, or comedic roles. And I know like a lot of acts. I work with a lot of stage actors who have primarily done dramatic work. And I think this kind of segues into like what we were talking about previously about like
Sure,
stepping out of your
sure.
comfort zone.
Yeah, yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who has never done comedic work, but maybe they're an experienced actor, maybe they've been acting 10 plus years or whatever,
Hmm.
and they've only done dramatic roles before? Like, what advice would you give them for wanting to step into the comedic arena and like take on, like, say they want to audition for a comedic role in a film, very talented actor, but they've just never like played a comedic role before?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that the fundamental work you do as an actor is not that different. Your character doesn't know that the moment is funny usually. If you're, coming like the scene we shot, right? It's like my character, none of the characters in that scene thought that the scene was, you don't imagine, as an actor, you kind of don't perceive the audience out there going, oh, this is hilarious, because
Yeah.
that's not what you're playing. You're not
Yeah.
like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, isn't this funny? I mean, if you're
Yeah.
doing that, you become Benny Hill, and that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that I often say is like comedy as an actor is not as different as say like writing and lighting and editing are for and scoring are for comedy, right? I
Right.
think and directing, comedy has a different kind of pace to it usually. But there are as many different kinds of comedy as there are maybe more different kinds of comedy than there are different kinds of drama. What I always think of, and someone, I'm sure this is a quote from someone, and I've lost the source over the years, but someone, maybe a director once told me, he said, when you do drama, people are kind of like, they're empathetic. They're like, oh, these poor people. When you do comedy, they're like, okay, yeah, you think you're so funny, make me laugh.
Yeah.
It's a different audience chemistry. I guess the one thing I'd say is that stylistically with comedy, you can be a little looser. You can be a little more willing to go over the top when the material calls for it. Like you wouldn't come into, Death of a Salesman and be like, I'm going to tell a bunch of farmers' daughters jokes. That's not what that is.
Yeah.
But like Waiting for Godot, right? You can interpret that as very deadly serious absurdist theater, or you can go for the comedy. You can go for the laughs. Those characters are meant to be clowns. They are meant to be in an absurdist world that they're struggling to understand. And that's funny. You
Yeah.
should allow that to be funny. But I've seen it done both ways. It kind of works both ways, but I tend to prefer myself the comedic approach.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to just inhabiting the character. And if your anger is more, comedic, cartoonish, red in the face, yelling at the top of your lungs, gesticulating wildly, what you do. I mean, you could do that on stage. You might even be bigger with it on stage than you might be directed to be on camera, or you
Right.
might go full theatrical because it's funnier that way. So I think it's kind of like what we talked about, like you said, with stagnation. It's like allow yourself, be fearless, right, with whatever
Yeah.
kind of acting you do. But with comedy, I've been, naked and funny on film, and it's like the character doesn't think it's funny at all. He's, standing here arguing with another character while he's stark naked. But that's part of the comedy of the
Yeah.
scene. It was similar in your film, right? There was that balance of like, it's funnier because the circumstances make it funny, but the
Yeah.
characters aren't reacting to that
No.
and pointing and laughing at it. And we can't. If you're telegraphing the joke, it becomes less funny. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, it's a truism that comedic actors can usually do drama. Dramatic actors can't always do comedy. But
Yeah.
it's always a joy to see Alec Guinness, the classical, mostly classical actor. Most people know him, now from Star Wars. But he did a comedy when he was younger, maybe in his 30s, called, oh gosh, I'm going to mangle the name now, but The Man in the White Suit, or the not the gray flannel suit. Anyway, it's an Ealing Studios comedy, fairly early in his career, and he is kinetic and stammering and hopelessly in love but unable to articulate it. He is hilarious in that movie, and look at what Michael Caine does in different roles, because he can be absolutely hilarious, but he's not always asked to be. Ian McKellen's got a really wry sense of humor, but he's not always asked to play that. So it's always interesting to see, what you end up doing when you're playing comedy. But yeah, I guess my advice is let yourself go,
Hmm.
find the tone of it. That's probably the most important thing. Is
Hmm.
if you're here with the looseness and everyone else is here, the director should get you back, so you're in
Yeah.
sync. But if everyone else is up here and you're playing it completely straight, that's not going to work either.
Yeah.
It's always collaboration. It's always listening, but it's maybe listening in a little broader tone than just like moment to moment. It's also like finding the style of it and finding the right comedic approach. And that's where you look to the director to
Hmm.
say, hey, just do it, but double time it. This is going to be funnier if it's faster. And you can't always see that as an actor. You're just like, oh, okay, yep, I can speed it up. I know the lines. All right,
Yeah.
here we go. I'm going to just, play it that way. And then afterwards, after cut, you're like, oh, yeah, that was so much better. And sometimes you don't recognize it till you see the final edit and you go, oh, that's why the pace of that needed to be cranked up to 11 because the director knew where it was going to fit in the story and it
Yeah.
needed to have a certain energy for it to work with the rest of the film. And you have no way to see that
Hmm.
as an actor shooting that particular scene.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but I mean, I think not everyone can do drama, not everyone can do comedy, but every actor should at least try and should
Hmm.
get that in their wheelhouse. Shakespeare wrote great comedies and great tragedies, and you need to understand what he's saying in whichever one you're doing. And when it's funny, it is a little more jokey, and you can emphasize the rhythm of things to make the joke work. But you're still playing a character, and you're still having to deliver this. With Shakespeare, it can be complex dialogue, but if you know what you're saying, the audience will know what you're saying, and that works for a joke as well as it does for a really meaningful soliloquy.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. I think that I mean, I definitely resonate with what you said. I think that like that's definitely even though I'm not like a trained actor, like everything you said made a lot of sense. Like I can definitely like put the pieces together, like
Well,
thinking
you're
about.
you're you're writing and directing comedy. You understand the rhythm of what you want to get out of these scenes, and I think your scripts do a really nice job of kind of setting the like you can kind of tell what the tone of the scene is supposed to be just from the way it's written.
Oh well, thank you.
But knowing that you're the writer and director makes it easier for us as actors because we can tell you know where we have questions and we can try something and look to you to go, was that what should we look for the notes to you, right? That's
Yeah.
what's really that give and take when you're actually getting ready to shoot it is really valuable. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the compliment. Uh, and I appreciate the work you've done on camera for me.
yeah, it was it was
Always
it was a
great to
pleasure.
work
It
with.
was it was really nice too. That's one thing I do notice is I tend not to like socialize as much the first time I work with new people, so it's
Mhm.
always really a joy to come back and see them again because I'm like, oh, now I know this person, and I feel a little more relaxed and a little bit less like, oh, I really got to focus on the work. I don't have time to talk. I will have more freedom. I'll give myself more freedom
Yeah.
to socialize and to chat and to still focus on the work, but to be a little more relaxed in the, enjoy the social aspect of it a little more. I'm not always great at that on first meeting, so getting to work with someone again is always a joy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and I mean, I'm pretty early on in my journey, but I plan on doing this until I die or can't anymore. And yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to like the community that will be
yeah,
built over time and all the connections.
it's this industry is remarkably small. You work on things with somebody, and then it turns out, oh, they know you from somewhere else. That it's always nice when you go to set and people are like, oh, I've been looking forward to working with you, and I'm like, I'm very glad to meet you, and this is a little weird. I'm not used to it yet.
Yeah. Oh, that's got to be great.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice to
Flattering.
feel like you've got a good reputation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that
definitely.
people, like if people don't want to work with you, they won't usually say anything. Nobody's going to
Yeah,
say
I would hope not.
"Oh man, you're here. I'm so sorry I took this gig."
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a wonderfully small world, and you're, I mean, you're doing the hard work. You're making films, you're making features, and that's not an easy thing to jump in and do. So, kudos to your writing and organizational skills as well, because there are a lot of people who can come up with a good idea and a decent script, but execution is not the easy part by any means. It's the expensive part, it's the time consuming part, it's the riskiest part where things can go wrong. And I know you've got stories, we all have stories about weird little things. Whoops. Did we lose my internet connection? Can you still hear me? Can you
Uh-oh.
still hear me? I think I lost my
You
internet
cut
connection
out
for
there
a
for
moment there.
about 15, 20. You cut out for about 15, 20 seconds.
Okay, okay. So yeah, so I was just saying, I think we all have stories about the
Mhm.
things that go wrong, but that's the nature of the work as well. And coping with those is like always a good sign of an organized production. I always say if your plan A is well put together, your plan B is kind of implied. It's much easier to look at your shot list and say, you
Mhm.
know what, it's raining, let's move and do these interiors. We'll put some lights outside the window to get the right time of day.
Yeah.
That we can do that rather than waiting an hour for the rain to stop. Let's just keep moving and shoot something. And
Yeah.
that's always reassuring. That's probably the biggest thing that, as an actor and I think as a crew member, that you look to the director for is for them to be decisive and to keep things moving.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to be at loose ends when we have, this massive stack of work to do, right, over the duration of a shoot. It's
Oh
like, let's
yeah.
get something done, What can we
Yeah.
shoot? Can we shoot some inserts because we're having an audio issue? We need some batteries. Someone's running to solve the problem, but can we do something in the meanwhile? Can we at least
Yeah.
block a scene and rehearse it a few times? There's
Yeah. No,
usually
that's so
something
important. Yeah.
productive that you can do, yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. No, I've definitely had to move shots around. I've had to like exactly, it was like raining. I've had to move shots that were supposed to be outdoors and find a
Yeah.
creative way to move them indoors. And
Hmm.
I definitely agree that there is always something you can be doing. That's so
And
important.
if you're organized, then it's much easier to say, "Oh, hey, looking at the shot list, here's something else we can do." If you're
Yeah.
not organized, then almost anything goes wrong, and it's kind of instantly chaos, and that's never a good thing. You don't see
No.
that happen very often. Usually with like student projects, or very very low budget indie projects where they're like, I want to make a movie, but I don't quite know what I'm doing, and it can be a little frustrating. But you get it done
Yeah.
generally.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you live, you learn.
Hmm. For
There's
sure.
so much I've learned from both of the features I've made, like things that I wouldn't do again, or
Yeah.
things that I would do again, and
Yep.
just things that it's the experiences that build you.
Yes, indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. You learn from doing, and especially with this kind of work, there's always the stuff that you know how to do and you know what to deal with, and then the surprises come up, and you're like, next time I will be better prepared on that
Yeah.
front. But
Yeah. No, I've definitely been humbled a few times on both sets, and
we all have. That's if
yeah,
you don't take the risks, if you
yeah,
don't, like we said earlier, if you're not willing to fail and learn, you're not going to grow and
yeah.
and mature as an artist
Oh
and
yeah,
get to the
absolutely.
place you really want to be.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so just moving on, starting to wrap things up a little bit. I mean, we could talk all night,
yeah, we're good at that.
but a few questions that I ask all of my guests. If there is one writer and or director you could work with, who would they be? It could be one person or two,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
writer, yeah.
I mean, I would say just based on personal favorites, like John Waters, the who's still with us. We'll see how much longer he's around. This is the one pop I have in my collection.
Oh,
Is
nice.
but I have like a few of his unfilmed scripts,
Uh,
and I'm like, man, I wish this had been able to be made. He's written so much stuff that just appeals to me. There's a joy in what he does, and any comedy that has that kind of brashness, that kind of thumbing the nose at the establishment is something that I find really appealing. So I'd love to do something he's written. Director wise, most of my like the directors that I grew up admiring are getting up in years and not working so much anymore.
Yeah.
There's this whole class of like Akiva Goldsman, as a comedy director. I'd like to work with him at some point. I mean, there are always people where you're like, oh, I would love to go work with this person. Either of the Coen brothers, or if I look at the full history, it's like, oh, I would have loved to like have been in something Preston Sturges directed or something. Comedy Billy Wilder, right? There are all these great comedic sensibilities.
Yeah.
And you can see that in comedy, pretty clearly. I mean, Tim Burton, when he does something that's funny, I just love, the results.
Yeah, did you see the Beetlejuice sequel?
I did finally, yes.
I
didn't
liked
see
it a lot.
Yeah, I did too. I
Yeah.
did, and I'm a huge fan of the first one. I really liked the way this one built on it, and I think did some things that were a little more like it kind of feels like bookends to his career in a way, right? It's like the new film feels more emotional, a little more heartfelt
Yeah,
in a
definitely,
lot
yeah.
of ways.
Yeah.
Still fun and crazy in the ways that you want that franchise to be, but also dealing with, loss and aging and, some in subtle ways, but it's a more human picture in
Yeah.
a lot of ways than the first one. The first one is so much fun. I've always loved it. But yeah, I was happy. I was really happy with the sequel. Yeah, again, like all my references are out of date. Like Hal Roach is long gone. Jacques Tati and Frank Tashlin are no longer with us. There are a lot of great comedy directors. And I mean, great directors in general. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
if David Lynch had a little project he was shooting in his backyard on, 8 millimeter, and he wanted me, I would be like, for sure, I will be there. Whatever you
Yeah.
need me to do,
Yeah.
Like I said, I love the storytelling, and that's always kind of wishful thinking. It's like I'm happy to work with any director who will have me and has an interesting script to work on. I always like to play characters that challenge me as a performer, or that might, hopefully at least get a laugh from an audience, or that maybe make a point about, types of people that we wish we didn't have to deal with. So yeah, I think there are always the people where I'd be. I mean, I'm always happy to do any project that comes up, and so yeah, I can have my wish list of like fantasy directors, but it's not something I think about day to day. It's more about, hey, this is the work that I get to do.
Yeah.
I've gotten to work with some theater directors, in Michigan that are really sharp when it comes to comedy, and who, saw some things in me that I didn't know were in there that they were able to draw out in terms of physical comedy, and that helped me to
Yeah.
grow. All of those, anytime someone's willing to take a risk on you and give you the responsibility of delivering something for their project, you appreciate it, and it gives you confidence, and you learn from it. Because if you're a little bit nervous about taking it on, that's a really good sign. Dive in, do the work, and it usually pays off really nicely.
Yeah, right on. One performer you could work with.
Oh, gee, that's well, I mentioned her once already. I would love to work with Joan Cusack.
Yeah.
I've loved so much of her work over the years. And I don't know, there's something about her comedic sensibility and her groundedness as a performer that really appeals to me. Who else? There are definitely. I would love to do something with Kevin Smith. I guess as a
Okay.
director, or as a performer. I know I've worked with two other Kevin S's, and I'm like, oh, the one I'd really like to work would be Smith.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's like, yeah. I mean, I like people who are funny and naturally, seem naturally funny, but who you can tell understand the mechanics of comedy.
Yeah. Vince
I
Vaughn comes to mind when you say that.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. I
Paul
always like,
Rudd.
Yeah, yes, yes. Yeah, Ryan Reynolds
Yeah,
is very often very funny, and it seems, in a natural way. I always
Jason Bateman.
the,
Sorry, I'll
yeah,
stop
for
interrupting.
sure. Yeah, but it's the mechanics of comedy that you
Yeah,
kind of have to have in your bones. I mean, it's a deep people who have a deep understanding of comedy are the ones who can be naturally comedic.
yeah,
Your uncle who gets drunk and just says random things may be hilarious within the family, but no one's going to want a ticket to see that on the big screen.
yeah,
I mean, naturally funny is not the same as knowingly but seemingly naturally funny. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a subtle distinction, but those of us who know comedy, I think, can kind of understand it. I remember Mike Judge, the writer, director, voice actor who created
Yeah,
Beavis and Butthead back in the
he
day.
did King of the Hill as well, didn't he?
Yes, King of the Hill,
Yeah.
yep, and Idiocracy, the movie, Office Space,
Yes,
the movie, is
yes, yes.
his.
He's so good. Yeah,
Yes, he is, and he's
yeah,
knowing and he's satiric in a funny way. He's
yeah.
great at characters as well, developing characters. But he once said, when Beavis and Butthead was at its most popular, people would come up and go, so like, dude, are you just like Beavis and Butthead? And he's like, Beavis and Butthead couldn't put an exposure sheet together to save their lives. I'm doing animation here. I got to think in little tiny increments and tell my story. It's just like that's like the extreme example that I think of where it's like, yeah, to do this work of making something funny is more than grabbing your iPhone and getting your friends drunk.
Yeah.
It's that may be funny to you in your immediate circle, and you may get something really genuinely funny that goes viral, but it's going to be on fail blogs, not on Universal's latest, slate.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, I think comedy. I loved Monty Python when I was a kid. My dad introduced me to them in the early '70s, and they clearly knew like how to take a goofy premise and get the maximum comedic value out of it. Usually by playing it straight or by playing a straight situation to the extremes. I learned a lot about comic timing from them. I also recently rediscovered a Disney record that I listened to all the time as a kid and hadn't thought about in probably 50 years. I ran across it on the internet and I'm listening to it and I'm going, oh my God, I know this by heart. And a lot of my comedic timing instincts are coming out of this Uncle Scrooge story. Just the rhythm
Yeah.
of it and the way it plays. I'm going, I learned a lot about comedy. Like a lot of my natural comedic rhythms were definitely influenced by that one recording because I
Yeah.
listened to it over and over. As a kid, especially when I was growing up, your little record collection was really all you had. You didn't have streaming, you didn't have VHS video even. So the things that you had access to, you tended to really indulge. And then I hadn't thought about it in decades, and it came roaring back, and I'm like, oh, yep. Bum, 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 bum. I remember the rhythm of this line in a way that has stuck with me. So it was just funny. It was like, oh yeah, this is a little radio comedy done for Disney, and I'm like, yeah, this was an influence. It was funny.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. No, I remember you bringing that up on dinner break on set.
oh yes, I did. Okay,
No, no,
when I've told someone about this, it
no,
was probably you.
yeah, no, it's a cool story though for sure. It's
Yeah,
it is crazy how much like things can get in your subconscious and you just have no idea.
Yeah, you really don't. Your influences are everything. But you learn how to navigate comedy. Everyone learns it in different ways. But I always say like little kids understand the rhythm of a joke. They don't yet understand the structure and the way a joke is sort of implied and leads you to a surprising conclusion. They will give you the structure of a joke when they try to make up a joke, but they don't quite understand what it is yet. So there's a development, there's a learning, a sophisticated understanding. Like I always when people talk to me about AI, I'm always like, AI can't write a joke to save its life.
Oh, it's so bad.
And it can't tell.
it's funny, but not for the
Right,
right
it's
reason.
absurdly right,
Yeah,
and well, and you can ask it to write six variations on a comedic idea, but it has no idea which one's funniest, and usually none of them are actually funny. And if
yeah,
you ask it to explain what's funny about it, it just explains some aspect of the premise. It does not explain why the juxtaposition ought to be funny.
yeah.
That kind of thing. I often throw it prompts that are like similar to stuff I used to write for Yankee Pot Roast or National Lampoon,
Mhm.
just to see what it comes up with, and it's like, no, it doesn't understand comedy.
Yeah. No, I mean, it doesn't understand anything about comedy, but it also doesn't understand like invoking human emotion at all. Like
No, there's
I
no human being in there, and I don't
yeah.
think there ever will be. But that's a whole
No.
other discussion.
Yeah, and I actually I talked about this quite a bit with Christian on the first podcast, and it was
Uh huh.
all of this fear about AI, like replacing screenwriters, actors,
Hmm.
directors. Like it's just not real
Yeah,
life.
I always. I probably talked to you about this before, but I always go back to Eliza, the original attempt at a chatbot in the late 1960s. She was around as a program you could run on early personal computers in the late 70s. For about 5 minutes, she can fool you into thinking you're having a conversation, but by the time you get to 15, you know all of her linguistic tricks. You can see
Yeah.
through the curtain. And AI feels that way to me now. It's like you can get it to generate something that's maybe will inspire you to write something real, but it just can't get over that. It can't get beyond a C grade, it just can't get there.
I don't know if it
And
can get beyond a D, to be
yeah,
honest.
no. But when you look at it, it's always like, yeah, I would not, put my name on this and submit it
Yeah.
anywhere because it's not good. It doesn't. It's very samey. The more of it you see, it's inherently derivative, and
Yeah.
it
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
understand, like you said, emotion. It doesn't
Yeah.
understand comedy. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It can read something that sounds natural until you say, this is all very flat. This isn't really, it doesn't give you the energy that human beings do. And I don't yet see any way that it could.
No, I don't either.
There's no soul, there's no brain, however you want to think of it. There's no person in there. There's no
Yeah.
sense of judgment. There's no ability to say, "Oh, wait. That's the start of an idea, but maybe I'm going at this wrong. What I should do is this." It just goes, these words go together in a way I find statistically pleasing. My work here
Yeah.
is done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I've gone down this rabbit hole a lot. I've done a lot of research into the idea behind AI and replacing humans in the film industry and whatnot, and just everyone that I've talked to, all of like the like individual research I've done, like there's just no credible reason to actually be afraid of AI
Yeah, no.
replacing.
Once you experiment with it, you realize there are things it can do somewhat credibly, but there are plenty of things it can't do, especially in the creative realm, that I don't see a path for it to do because it's basically sophisticated Mad Libs. It's
Yeah,
taken some ideas and looking for language that relates to those and looking for a format it can slam those into. And it's amazing it can do some of what it does, but it's also very obvious that it doesn't understand what it's doing. And I
yeah.
think I think it can save time for like customer service. Like
Oh yeah,
80% of the inquiries you get are the same question. If
yeah,
the AI can draft a response and you can look at it and go, yeah, that's the form letter without it quite being the form letter, but akin to that,
yeah.
that can be helpful. But when you're on the other end of that, you're getting what's obviously an AI generated response. And if it's not being reviewed by a human and it's obviously missing the point of what you're saying, there's nothing worse than trying to talk to a chatbot and get it to understand what you mean. And it can
Yeah.
only map what you're saying into some canned responses it has. AI has the same fundamental issue. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that
Yeah.
again.
Cliff notes are your jobs are safe screenwriters, directors,
Yes,
actors.
indeed,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the last question that I ask all my guests: your top five comedy movies of all time.
This will change every time you ask me,
Yeah.
but I think I'll probably list at least a few of the ones that I talked to you about in the past.
Yeah. No problem.
In God We Trust. It's an obscure '80s religious comedy with Marty Feldman, Richard Pryor, Peter Boyle, Louise Lasser, Ned. Is Ned Beatty? No, Ned Beatty's not in it. I'm thinking of a different movie, but it's not the greatest comedy. Oh, Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of his few film performances. Worth checking out. It's one of those I saw at an impressionable age, so it probably sticks with me more than it ought.
Mm-hmm.
But it is worth seeing if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
Second, I'm gonna say, oh gosh. I'm actually going to say, I have to throw a John Waters movie in, and it'll be different every time you ask me, but I'm going to say Serial Mom. It's his sharpest, most like social commentary, but still outrageous and funny in the way his best work is. Mm-hmm. So Serial Mom, starring Kathleen Turner, Sam Waterston, Matt Lillard. It's worth checking out if you've never seen it. It's definitely a John Waters movie, but it's, I think, probably one of his more... Hairspray is the more accessible one, but Serial Mom is extremely watchable. Watch it on Mother's Day. It's a perfect fit. Okay. Let's see. Safety Last. Harold Lloyd, silent era comedy. Incredible stunt work. Incredible effects work. Very funny. Very mechanically solid in terms of plot, but also heartfelt. Lloyd was known mostly for his comedic stunt work, but that's one of my favorite. I saw Criterion has a restored version of it that is absolutely beautiful. It just looks great, and it's very, very funny. Well worth checking out. All right, 4 and 5. Let's see here. What am I getting down to here? It's always interesting when I try to think about this because there's so many movies I love. Top Secret, I'm going to say, is number 4. Okay. It's a Zucker Abrams Zucker film.
I think that's the first. That's the first one you've mentioned that I've actually seen.
Yeah. It's like their earlier Airplane films and their later Naked Gun and Police Squad projects, but it is more coherent plot-wise than those are. It still has the same kinds of outrageous... Sometimes it takes the big swings on stupid jokes that don't always work, but when they do work, I just love them. I love the sensibility of it. I love some of the elaborate lengths they go to pull off a complicated gag that is like... When watching it as, someone who knows how the industry works, it's like... They must have had to shoot that 8 times to get it right, but it's so beautiful that they did that. I admire that so much. Even if the joke itself isn't as amazing as the process that you can tell went into it, I love that. And then Mel Brooks always has to be in my top 5. Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles are the traditional ones. I'm going to point people to Silent Movie.
I have not seen that one.
It's one of his lesser known ones. It is almost completely dialogue free. There's one sharp joke involving Marcel Marceau, the famous mime, which does involve a word. But if you have any appreciation of silent film, if you love seeing Mel Brooks and Marty Feldman and I'm trying to remember who else is in the cast. It's been a while since I've seen it. But it is one that is worth seeing if you haven't seen it. It's not as good as the other two, but it has a place in my heart because, again, I kind of saw it at the right age to appreciate it. And when I think back on his body of work, I'm like, for purposes of this kind of conversation, I'm going, if you like Mel Brooks, you should see that one because you probably haven't, and it's worth checking out.
I haven't, and I do like Mel Brooks a lot. I think that he's just so talented. I think he writes just tremendous screenplays.
And he has a sense of comedy, but also of humanity that makes his comedy work. And some of my favorite comedies are not particularly, heartfelt. And I mean, his stuff is very jokey, but there's always a core where you empathize with his characters. There's always some aspect, no matter how outrageous things are, there's always something that you relate to on a human level. Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman and Young Frankenstein, they're extreme characters, but their goals and their feelings are on their sleeves, and you can be like, oh yeah, I felt exactly like that at various times. So those are the 5 I'm going to name today. You ask me in a week, you'll get 5 different answers, but what you'll notice is I tend to go like, these are people whose work I really admire. You
Yeah.
should check this out if you haven't seen it.
Oh, that's it's definitely a unique list. I feel like none of those are going to get repeated, which is
Well,
cool.
some of it's generational. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm older, and I've seen some of the newer stuff, but a lot of it I'm not as familiar with. It's
Uh-huh.
like, it's like I've seen most of what Kevin Smith has done,
Hmm.
at least all of his comedies, and I love his work.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of the like Seth Rogen and those movies. I saw Josh Gad when he made his Broadway debut years ago when nobody knew who he was, and
Hmm.
I've always loved him. He's always been hilarious when he's in stuff. I'm always interested. But yeah, it's I love comedy of all eras, and the ones that have stuck with me are often ones I saw, when I was at an age to be like, oh, this is where I first saw this kind of comedy,
Yeah.
this kind of humor,
Yeah.
where it really
Absolutely.
worked for me.
Yeah.
And I also just like to say, hey, check this out if you haven't seen it because it's worth watching.
Yeah.
You may watch it once and say, okay, I don't ever need to see that again, but some of those will stick with you, and you can at least see some people working at the top of their craft.
Yeah.
And I finally saw Yellowbeard, which I managed to not see for 30, 40 years. And when I finally saw it, I was like, yeah, I see why this didn't get great reviews. But at the same time, it's some really brilliant comedic actors doing some work that comes in moments, and the whole film doesn't work so well. But it's still like, I'm glad I watched it finally because it was good to see it. It was good to
Yeah.
see some people whose work I appreciate doing something worthwhile.
Yeah.
Um,
I have not seen that one, but I can like relate in that like if I love a comedic actor, like I'll watch their like movie that got like a 10% on Rotten
yeah,
Tomatoes, and I
yeah,
completely understand why it did, but like I'll still like just because I
right.
like
So,
them so much, like I'll just be laughing and
well,
having
and
a good time.
sometimes comedy, you know, comedy I think tends to get locked into its time period a little more than other genres do. Like you can go back and watch an old Humphrey Bogart, crime melodrama, and it'll still kind of work in the way it was meant to work, right?
Hmm.
Like the mechanics of those stories tend to be consistent. Comedy is often very much of its time, you know. Like The Simpsons kind of inherited the National Lampoon mantle in its early years because a lot of the writers were coming from Harvard Lampoon, people who would have gone to work on the Lampoon, coming out of school
Hmm.
at Harvard, ended up going to work on The Simpsons, and a lot of writers went from National Lampoon to the early years of The Simpsons. So there's a comedic thread through there,
Yeah.
but today The Simpsons is something different, right? I mean, it's had to evolve because it's been on the air so long.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
you see those changes happen. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree to an extent with what you said. I think that they're and I know you weren't saying this as like as an absolute, but I know that's like it is like a widely regarded opinion about like how comedy doesn't always age the best. I think that there are a lot more timeless films than people think.
yeah, I would
I
I would agree with that.
like,
And,
and I think it just depends on like if what you are doing is something that's just not unique to that era. Like for
right,
example, like
right.
the example I think of is like The Vacation with Chevy Chase,
Uh huh. Uh
because
huh.
like that's just like something people have done forever, and like they will always go on road trips across the
Right,
country as a
right.
family. So like, I
But
think
but
that's a movie. That's a movie that works
but it had
great
a
in
certain
2024. I think
right.
in 30 years
Yeah.
it'll still work just as well.
Yes, I think so, and I think comedy can be ahead of its time too. You can have
Yeah.
a film that didn't work well when it came out, but people develop an affection for it. Like Office Space.
Yeah.
My wife and I were like the only people in the theater on opening weekend.
Oh,
I'm
really?
like,
Okay.
I'm like, oh man, this was hilarious. This was
Yeah.
great, but nobody's going to see it. People discovered it several years later on Comedy Central when it was airing in heavy rotation,
Mhm.
and when more people, I think, were kind of like aware of that kind of corporate job vibe and appreciated the joke more than
Yeah.
they did when it came out. So I think comedy, I mean, one of my favorite, comedies, one that I watch, every now and then is Trading Spaces,
Uh huh. Yeah, with Dan
Trading
Aykroyd
Places
and
rather, Trading Places, the John
yeah.
Landis, yeah, Dan Aykroyd,
Yeah.
Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
That film when you watch it in the wider perspective, it feels like a 1940s or 50s comedy. It feels like, it's very formal in its structure. It's very class comedy. It's very much like a film from 20, 30 years earlier. But that formality holds up today. So it's like it's both a throwback and an enduring comedy, in part because it's just a great comedy and it's well structured, it's really well performed. It's, language and stuff, you can tell it's a 1980s film as opposed to a 1940s film. But if you had had that script and shot it in black and white, it would be an enduring comedy classic whenever it got made. So, but I think sometimes you have topical references that don't age as well.
Yeah.
Like I've been watching a lot of 1930s cartoons recently, and some things are just eternal and they hold up, and some things I'm like, who is this they're lampooning? I've got to go do a little research to fully get the joke. Some things are eternal and some things are of the moment, and satire in particular tends to be a little more of the moment,
Yeah.
I mean, I love the old, Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert comedy, It Happened One Night. I don't think you could remake that because in the era of cell phones, none of the premise holds up. The story would resolve itself in 5 minutes because someone with a phone would take a photo of the quote missing heiress and her family would track her down immediately. It's just the plot depends on certain constraints that just don't work. You can't find a way to make that plot work today. Yeah, I mean, you could probably rewrite it in a way that would work, but you'd have to take a lot of new things into account. So that's the kind of stuff that is always interesting to me of film of any kind. But comedy, I think, very often is dependent to some degree on our familiarity with certain cultural tropes that are sort of the moment. And those can get lost. Though if you really enjoy the film, you'll go do the research and look it up on Wikipedia and go, what were they referring to? This trade act that was very controversial in 1928. That's what they're talking about. Okay. But comedy is great. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it, whatever era. So, glad to see you making some comedies that are, stylistically, that are based, that are inspired by comedy that you love and that you're reinterpreting in a new way. You and I talked about this. Like, I love how the National Lampoon Radio Hour in the early 1970s was really inspired by radio drama and comedy of the 1940s and 50s. Like, you could see that the stuff these people grew up listening to is kind of their starting point to parody it. Same with Firesign Theater. People doing that kind of comedy were inspired by what came before. And that's always interesting to me, where there's like this little one generation lag in terms of what you were loving in one era that you can now know well enough to really make fun of and to be sharp and precise with your skewering and your parody and your satire. So it's a good thing.
Absolutely. No, laughter's the best medicine.
Indeed.
But, it was great talking with you, Dale.
Yeah, always a pleasure to talk to you, Benjamin.
I appreciate you coming on the show. And
glad to be on. Thank you for having me. Yeah, no, any time. I mean, if we have some other topics to discuss, or
I'm sure,
there's something we want to get into in more detail, where we can do some homework and come back and say, okay, let's talk about the history of print humor magazines. It's like I participated in a little bit of that history, but I know more of the deeper history. There's always stuff to talk about. But
definitely.
Stuff that'll work for your audience is what's most important. So thank you for having me, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening. Thanks for
likewise.
Good conversation, always.
As always, Talk soon.